Good morning and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we're back once again, breaking this thing down verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that we can understand who or what is Allah Akbar, what does he mean by the contents of his book here, and more importantly for us non-believers, how does this affect us in our lives in the world today? So, before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any complaints, doubts, or anything to do with my factual accuracy, any questions, please first buy, translate and read one of these, an Arabic Quran, not an English one, because they're not the same. Buy, translate and read an Arabic Quran, and once you have done that, you will recognise every single word I'm about to say to you now is 100% true and accurate of the words of Allah and what Muslims believe today. So, if you saw the last episode, which was the first 8 verses of AL-NIISA, the Book of Women by Allah in the Quran of the Muslims, you'll remember that he has some rather harsh conditions on his orphans, most notably girls who are going to become prostitutes, and they shall be held in the right hand of the man, used as tools and weapons, in order that they can make a lot of profit, and they really don't have much of a life or any role outside of making money for the man. So with that in mind, let's carry on where we left off with verse number 9. Number 9. If they produce only weak or failing, useless children for offspring, chastise them as they did so because they did not fear Allah. They must fear Allah and speak only in answer to you as fair and correct in the words of Allah. End of verse. So I feel like it didn't take Allah long to get down to the grimy, dirty business of punishing women for being alive as women. It wasn't like the first 8 verses were nice. There was nothing nice in there, but he didn't go straight in with a burning you over hot coals and punishing you forever angle, much like he did in the previous books. But I feel like he has moved things along swiftly, and we're now about to get to the gory, bloody, painful punishment of the women. So if we break it down, that's why he's saying, of the orphans, remember, that's who we're still talking about, orphan girls who may or may not be of age, they might be 3, 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, we don't know. If they produce weak or failing or useless children for offspring, i.e. if the children of the children are not good enough to work and make you money, chastise them as they did so because they did not fear Allah. They didn't do that because you are starving them or because they're tortured slaves and prostitutes and they're not even old enough to understand what's happening to them, being as they're still largely children. No, it's nothing to do with that. It's because they didn't know the Quran of the Muslims. They weren't fearing and obeying Allah correctly, and that has caused their children to be not good. Because their children are not good, this is their fault. They're going to be punished because they weren't following Allah's word, and they must fear Allah. So punish them, chastise them, and they must speak only in answer to you. They're not allowed to talk. They're not allowed to have their own little discussions or chats or back chats to you. Certainly not. No, you'll give them one of these. Speak only in answer to you is what they are told, as is fair and correct in the words of Allah. So remember, if you're doing this, in Allah's eyes, you're treating them fairly, and Allah is your only witness. So if other people complain, ignore the other people. If the Westerners criticize, ignore the Westerners, lie about it, cover up the sins of your brothers. The only person that matters here, to you, O Muslim male, is Allah. As long as Allah is happy, you're treating them fairly, they'll be happy, even though they're completely miserable and their children are unhealthy as a result of this. And the fact is they're having children by you because they're prostitutes. It's not that they want to have children. But that's verse 9, and that's what this means, so we'll carry on. Verse number 10. Surely they who try to keep their money when it belongs to the mosque for charity will roast like coals in fire. Allah sees their evilness and makes you their teacher. End of verse. I told you it wouldn't take long, didn't I? So if we break this down, what it means, surely they who try to keep their money when it belongs to the mosque for charity will roast like coals in fire. We're still talking about the orphan girls who are the children who have children. The little poor, unfortunate souls whose family were probably killed and they were taken as slaves. Those ones, If they try and hide that money from you, O Muslims, if they try and keep it for themselves and not give it to you so that you can give it to the orphans, that's apparently where the money that you give the mosque goes to. It's just charity. It just goes to orphans, even if you're taking it from the orphans who you've enslaved into prostitution. They're not allowed to keep it. If they do, they'll be burning on hot coals, and then they'll be in the ever fire forever, being tortured by Allah. So don't let that happen. Surely if they try to keep their money, they will roast like coals in fire. Allah sees their wickedness and their evil and makes you their teacher. Now, isn't it funny how in the Gospels, in the New Testament, Jesus is the teacher. Jesus teaches everyone, but he never burns anyone over hot coals. He doesn't enslave girls after punishing and killing their families and invading their lands. When Jesus is teaching people, he's teaching them proverbs, he's teaching them wisdom, he's teaching them morality, he's teaching them how to have good lives so that their futures will be enriched with his wisdom and they will go on to live happy lives and not go around killing and enslaving innocent people. But when Allah is teaching you, O Muslim man, you are to teach the orphans that you have enslaved and made prostitutes and their children who are unhealthy. They're not allowed to keep any money. They have to give it to you. You have to give it to Allah at the mosque. Otherwise, you're not worshipping enough, because that's the whole point of the endeavour of taking these slave girls. They've got no other purpose apart from having children to go and swing swords at Jews and paying charities to the mosque, which go back to Allah. That's what this means. Now, verse 11 is a little bit longer because we're now going to go through who inherits what if one of these poor unfortunates is to die while they're carrying money. Because remember, at the end of the night, they're going to give all their money to you. So this is directly talking about if they die on the job, as it were. If they get beaten to death by one of their clients or they die mysteriously on the streets and nobody knows how it happened because we're covering up the sins of our brothers and we're preaching up the religion. So they just died, just the fact that they've got bloody beaten bodies and they got set fire to or whatever, they're covered in blood, doesn't matter. We're not going to investigate it. We're covering up the sins of our brothers, remember, and we're preaching up the morality and the greatness of Allah and his religion, Islam. So, with that in mind, verse 11. In hearing of inheritance for those left behind, mothers who do die, each daughter has a third, yet a boy gets double share, 2/3, which is twice the girl's portion. If there is only a single daughter, she will get half, and to the guardians both further a 1/6, which would have been for a son if they had had a son. Pay debts to your mosque first, and also charities after, as you must fear Allah. Do not have any discussion over what Allah has ordained, be it so. End of verse. So a very long, wordy, difficult to understand verse, but if we break it down, what he's talking about here, when these poor unfortunates are killed or die, who's going to take hold of their money? This is exactly like the first Sharia, the law of equity over murder. Who gets the stuff of the dead guy? That's what Allah's interested in. He didn't care about the dead guy. Didn't even care about who killed him, really. Who keeps the stuff? That's what's more important. So who's keeping the stuff of these poor unfortunate dead orphan girls is not going to be their children. That's what we find out here. Because even though it says each daughter has a third, yet a boy gets 2/3, and if there is only a daughter, she gets half, none of them get more than half. So that means the remaining half goes to the Muslim man, and then he has to pay charities to the mosque. So effectively, Allah will be collecting most of that money. Actually, as well, what I've realised here, if each of a daughter gets a third, yet a boy gets 2/3, and there's only one daughter, she gets half. Half is more than 1/3, but slightly less than 2/3. So technically, if everyone gets their money and none of them die, there's a 1/6 going to be left over. So either the magical 1/6 is going to go back to Allah, because remember, you're not allowed to hide it, and Allah sees and knows all you do, so you can't just keep it, O Muslim. Either that is the case, where he's just magically going to pick that 1/6 up off the road, or, as I think, Muhammad has a very difficult time counting. He can't count up to 6, because there's 6/6 in a whole. And he's only described 5/6 here, so that means there's a 1/6 missing, which nobody's allowed to take, and is just left in the street then. No, I think what's happened is Muhammad's miscounted it. No one's allowed to update the Quran because it's the word of Allah, and Allah's not allowed to correct it either, because obviously no one ever knows where he is. No one's ever actually seen this guy or met him, apart from Muhammad, of course, who did the incorrect counting. So the end of the verse rounds out by saying, Further to this, a sixth which would have been for a son, they have to pay debts to the mosque with, and also charities, as you must fear Allah. Do not have any discussion over what Allah hath ordained, be it so. So what he's saying there at the end of the verse is, there will be no arguments about this, even though there's a sixth left over. Some poor unfortunate probably thinks, well, that's mine. I earned that money fair and square, or, you know, my sister or my friend earned it and then you killed her or she died. I deserve that money. No, no, no. Beat them if they do that, because they're evil and they're wicked and they're lying, and Allah has ordained this is what happens to the money. No arguments, even though there's a sixth left over. Which means there's going to be arguments. We're just not going to publish those because we're preaching up the religion and we're covering the sins of our brothers. So one of the brothers is going to take the spare sixth, not tell anyone. Allah will witness this, but he won't mind because he's oft forgiving, as long as you're male and not one of these poor unfortunate orphan girls. That's what this means, which is pretty disgusting. This is almost as bad as the first date. But anyway, we'll carry on. Number 12. If she hath no sons, then half is to you, and the other half to charity. If she has a son, then you get 1/4, and your wives get 1/4, and your sons and daughters first shall take of what they are bequeathed. So, the son gets nothing then, because you've forgotten. Muhammad has obviously been drinking or has bumped his head, because he's forgotten to write, even though he starts off by saying, if she hath no sons, then says, if she has a son. How this is written, if she hath no sons, then half is to you, and the other half is to charity. So that's a whole. If she does have a son, then you get 1/4, your wives get 1/4, and your sons and daughters get what they are bequeathed, which means if you've borrowed money off your sons and daughters, or you owe them inheritance, it comes out of the dead girl's money, or the son's money. But it says if it's a son, it doesn't mention what money he gets. So presumably, if it's a daughter that's died, then you divide up the money. If it's a son that's died, or if it's the mother that's died and left a son, he should be getting half the money, because only half the money is accounted for here. 1/4 goes to one person, 1/4 goes to the other, and out of what's left, your sons and daughters can take what they are bequeathed. But if they're not bequeathed anything, there's a half left over. But yet again, do not have any discussion over what Allah hath ordained. So we got a sixth left in the road from the dead girl. Now we've got half of what you've taken left in the road as well. So there's a sixth and a half of this lot in the road, just not bothered about. Nobody's allowed to take it because you'd be arguing over what Allah hath ordained. But as we know, nobody leaves money in the street. If that actually was followed, all Muslim streets would be littered with spare money, which they are not, because they've got terrible problems with poverty and they're half starving. So I think what we can tell from this is Muhammad can't count, Allah can't count. Allah, come over here a minute. Allah, come here. Allah. Who taught you to count? Did anyone bother to go through basic algebra with you? I mean, we use Arabic numbers here. You should definitely be able to count with Arabic numbers. Arabic numerals. It's exactly what we use. But it's clearly not adding up here, this inheritance. Have you done this on purpose so there's spare money sloshing around to create arguments between your people? Or are you just not very good at counting? I'll let you think about that. So, I haven't got a straight answer from Allah, either in the words or in my head. He wasn't brainwashing, mind-controlling me with the correct answers there. Maybe it's because I'm an evil Jew and I can count correctly because he's mind-controlling me, even though he can't count himself. That's what it looks like. But anyway, we'll go on to the next verse, because so far, out of 4 verses read, 2 made sense but were evil, 2 didn't make sense at all and prove that Muhammad and Allah can't count, and don't make a lot of sense. So let's hope verse 13 will introduce some more sensibility into this page of Quran. And we move on to number 13. Allah commands this. Oh, so we're still talking about the previous ones that didn't add up properly. Allah commands this, you know, the thing about leaving money in the road, and if you have a son, not giving him anything. Allah commands this, and Muhammad will be the watcher, as he is Allah's messenger. Deny it, and you shall burn in hell as infidels. Obey your Lord, and he may yet admit you to the paradise gardens, lest yet ye triumph. End of verse. So that was terrible. The grammar is very poor here, and I'm feeling like the grammar's bad, the counting's bad, The actual layout of the verses is bad. If I didn't know better, I would say that somebody has been editing this down after the fact. So it is in fact not the preserved perfect divine word of Allah. It's not even the word of Muhammad. This has been severely edited so that we can add more people in. So originally it probably said give half to you and half to you. And then someone said, well, what about me? I get a sixth. Okay, so we turn it into sixths now. So we've got a half plus sixths, which don't really, that will leave a fractional amount. And what's happened is because they didn't have decimals when this was done, they only had fractions, they've tried to add a half together with 2/3. So 2/3 is like that, and a half is like that. So you've got a little slice there, a sixth is going to be left out, and that's the bit that's left in the road. But they can't account for it without decimal numbers, which obviously Allah didn't have. Even though he says he creates everything and nothing's hidden from him. The decimal point seems to be hidden from him. So that's why he's now saying, Allah commands this, and Muhammad will be your watcher as he is Allah's messenger. So don't deny it, don't argue with it. Even if you can count, don't bring this to the Muslim man, because remember, covering up the sins, preaching up the religion, Allah knows everything, and if you argue, he'll spot you and you'll go to hell and burn forever in fire. So just put up with that. Don't deny it, or you'll burn in hell as infidels. Obey your Lord, and he may yet admit you to his paradise gardens, lest yet ye triumph. End of verse. So what he's saying is, if you don't notice the fact that there's a load of money left in the road, despite the fact that everyone's starving and miserable, and you've got to give money to the mosque at the end of the day, and you've got to surrender your profit to the Muslim man, as long as you don't whinge, and you go, yeah, that's all fine, it all adds up perfectly, even though it doesn't, if you do that, he may yet admit you to his paradise gardens, where you flow down to your final destination, the one that sounds like hell, that paradise garden. Not the one up there that they started the book in, we never see that again, they're banned from there forever. The one deep below the ground in the fire-filled cavern. So anyway, that's where you're going to end up if you don't argue with him. And if you do argue with him, you're going to end up burning forever in his evil fire. But I have to say, and I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, the paradise garden in the cave filled with fire, with the dead non-believers hanging on the wall screaming in pain in their grave torture, that sounds exactly like his underground paradise garden. So maybe this is all a big trick to make everyone go to the paradise garden, which is in fact the same thing as the evil fire. And that's why he doesn't really care about the orphans or the women, or in fact the men. He doesn't care that money's getting left in the road because someone's going to sweep it up and bring it back to his mosque. So all he really cares about, and this is very clear throughout every single verse, is that you obey Allah. Worship and obey Allah. Don't argue with Allah. Don't doubt Allah. Don't do anything that Allah hasn't told you to do, or you'll be in trouble. Off with your head, you're dead and burning forever in fire. That's the general consensus I'm getting from this book. So it's not really about women. Even though it's called AL-NIISA, women, it's about how the man will treat their women and how they obtain and procure the different types of orphan, prostitutes and slave women that they find. So anyway, that's what that means. And then we move on to our final verse of the day, number 14. This is so poorly written. Shameful torment and disgrace for all ye who do not listen to Allah's commands. Will you dare transgress against Almighty Allah? He will send you to burn like a coal forever, and none shall come to your aid. End of verse, end of reading. So we finish up on a verse split into two, because I feel like Allah commands this and Muhammad will be your watcher is the same verse as shameful torment and disgrace for you if you don't listen. These commands are both basically saying, don't argue with the rubbish maths of the previous verses, otherwise you'll burn in hell forever, and Muhammad's going to make sure you don't cheat. That doesn't need two verses. You could have just put that in one verse, Allah. In fact, this whole thing could have been put into 3 verses. It's like you've drawn it out to try and make the book longer, so that you can say, oh, our book's just as good as the Bible. Which, quite clearly, it is not. But anyway, now that we've gone through the verses, I feel like a summary is in order. So he starts off by saying, if these poor orphans who you are beating and turning into prostitutes and stripping of their free will, if they dare produce weak, failing or useless children, tell them off and beat them. And the reason that that's happened isn't because you're already telling them off and beating them and they're miserable and malnourished. It's because they didn't fear Allah. They weren't worshipping enough, so the mind control wasn't working, and you telling them off wasn't working. They just don't fear Allah enough, so just beat them some more, tell them off some more, take more money off them, send them out more, make their lives more difficult, and then they will learn to fear Allah. Apart from when they die. So that's why in the next verse, surely if they try to keep their money when it belongs to the mosque, they will roast in coals and fire. That Allah sees their evilness and their wickedness. So really what he's doing between the lines here implicitly is he's trying to make these women so miserable and poor and malnourished and depressed that they either die from that, kill themselves, or be killed by other Muslims. And the reason is, as we find out in verse 11, so that we can figure out who is going to get the money and how much Allah is going to get in charities at his mosque. And that is the real point of this whole book so far. It's nothing to do with women. It's nothing to do with the orphan girls. It's not even anything to do with the Muslim man. It's to do with how the Muslim man is going to recover as much of their money as possible to give back to the mosque without incurring the criticism of the Westerners. And again, it just shows the character of Allah when all he cares about, when he's torturing and enslaving random people from other cultures in their own countries, all he really cares about is their money. He's a greedy, greedy sod who is horrible and evil, doesn't care about women or orphans, but likes to show a face to the world that he's lovely and wise and caring. And the way that that face is shown is by his Muslims beating you on the head with this if you disagree or you disobey or you try to question the lies that they tell to cover up the sins of their brothers. And that is the end of this video, so I hope you enjoyed that and you learnt something. God bless you all, and I'll see you at 4:15 in the next one. Bye now. And once again, I'm absolutely sickened by Allah. Have you ever noticed how his voice actually sounds like someone being sick? So anyway, I'll see you back here at 4:15. Until then, have a great day, God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.